snap time, we call it. Right, oh, buddy, time for snap. 20 minutes. Well, back then, and open your tin, your Tommy box of sandwiches, and your tin of water. And you had 20 minutes to eat that. Sometimes
is with that. However pretty they make a top of a pit, they can't do nothing much underground.
Ponies still provided the only motive power in the pits, apart from the muscles of men. They hauled coal from the face back to the shaft.
Ponies cost money. Men were cheap, and if you'd done anything wrong to a pony, then you not only had the manager to contend with, you had the hostler as well. And it'd give you some stick if you went back to the stables with your pony sweating and lathered up. You'd know you'd been abusing the pony.
Ponies shared the hazards too. Mining was the most dangerous industry of all. 1,100 men were killed each year, and every day 500 were injured.
I don't know how it happened, but all of a sudden I found something heavy coming down on my back and forcing me to the floor. Luckily, I landed on my knees. I can remember that now. I landed on my knees because my knees ached a bit afterwards, you know. But I was flat out and completely covered in blackness. Well, I said, oh God, no. I thought I'd been completely buried.
Injuries from roof falls were part of the normal routine. Coal dust filled wounds to leave blue scars for life and clogged the miners' lungs. Few underground workers ended their working lives in full health. Above ground, colliers were backed up by the surface workers whose jobs were safer but lower paid. In Lancashire, women sorted coal on the screens.
It was hard work, and these belts was rolling all the time. There was about 24 of us with 2 belts. There was 12 to each belt. 6 at one side and 6 at the other, about a yard apart. And in the winter time, when it was very cold, the wind used to come bustling through, fingertips used to be raw. You know, because the coal's hard.
Surface workers and labourers were paid by the hour, but the face workers were paid on results, on piecework, measured by the weight they sent up or by the yard of coal face they cut away.
The original payment system was extremely complicated, and it varied from one coalfield to another, from one pit to another. It was the source of tremendous industrial relations problems, fighting to get a price list right. Pit colliery A had so many pence per ton. Colliery B, working the same seam, should have the same.
Cutting coal per ton, 1 and 8pence. Gobbing holing, extra per ton, 2pence. Headings, narrow per yard, 7 shillings.
That system was complex and produced a great deal of local disputes, continual disputes.
The greatest battle at pit level was the battle to get somewhere regarding prices a decent or a bare living wage. And that was the fundamental aim, I think, of the men, was to have something to look forward to after the week's wages that they could take money home to feed their families.
The battles over pay and conditions, the dangers, the provocations of the royalty system were behind the campaign miners had waged since the 1890s for the nationalization of the industry. Immediately after the First War, a strike loomed once again in 1919. A royal commission under Lord Justice Sankey looked into the strife-torn industry. Though the inquiry split, a majority came out for nationalization. Sankey himself concluded,
the relationship between the masters and workers of the coalfields in the United Kingdom is unfortunately of such a character that it seems impossible to better it under the present system of ownership.
The call for nationalization was rejected by the government, but the pressure on the embittered industry now increased. On the coal exchanges where coal was traded, prices fell as demand slackened in the post-war depression. The owners' response was to cut their men's wages, 70% of their costs. A long strike followed in 1921, but the miners were defeated and the wage cuts went through. In 1926, coal prices fell again. The government first gave, then withdrew a subsidy, and wages were cut once more. The miners' response led to the general strike.
The situation had worsened, and the miners went on strike. They approached the Trade Union Congress General Council, who agreed that they would bring in some of the other unions to help. They formed an alliance. It was called the Triple Alliance, but it didn't work out at all, because in fact the transport workers, although they were sympathetic to the miners' claims, weren't prepared to come out and strike on their behalf. But eventually the TUC, Trade Union Congress, decided to take action, and they simply drifted into it without any preparation.
The general strike collapsed after 9 days, but the coalfields were idle as the miners carried on alone.
We was destitute. Tried to palm us off into the workhouses, and they wouldn't have us in there because I can always remember them marching us to Baseford Workhouse and giving us black pudding and half a loaf of bread and cleared us out.
Though mining families suffered, they made the most of the summer.
We enjoyed the strike as well, like, you know, it is, everybody was happy. We had a lot of carnivals, such as jazz bands and character bands and comic bands, which everybody partook in. Everybody had to go with that. Very often in the morning we get up about 6 or 7 o'clock and we go up the tip and dig a few holes and get a much little ribblings and one thing and another and fill the sack of coal up and sell it to our friends who were working and had good jobs. So we sell it to them for about 9pence or shilling a bag.
After 7 months, the miners were defeated. The whole industry had been further damaged.
The coal owners went through an equally difficult time because the finances of the industry deteriorated to an alarming degree. In fact, some companies never survived the long period they were closed down, and the cost of reopening too. So that they had probably the worst period that has ever been experienced.
When we went back to the pit, there was the manager stood there, come on you, and gang of lads that take them, they knew. And these that had been militant, they knew everything. You not to come, get off, nothing for you. Send for you when we want you. And they saw it happen. And I knew families that never did get back in the pit after 26 try.
It's traditional in the mining industry and the private ownership that a bitter relationship existed between men and management, especially between the union and management. It was, of course, intensified as a result of the experiences of 1921 and 1926, because lower standards of living were having to be accepted by miners.
The miners had returned to work longer hours for a lower wage. Their sacrifice meant labour costs had halved in 5 years. Despite this, the major export fields, Durham and South Wales, were no longer competitive abroad. Other countries had taken British markets during the strike with cheaper coal. At home, the idle industries of the Depression needed less coal, and mining saw the highest unemployment of all.
There were thousands of the work. They had demonstrations. They had demonstrations in the valleys. They had one demonstration. There were 60,000 in a meeting there. The first hunger march from the valleys was organized in 1927. And in that march, I had an uncle living next over to one to us, and he took part in the march. He had a wife and 7 children, and he died on the march. He died of pneumonia.
Remember the procession of the old young men, from Dole Queue to Corner and back again. From the pinched, packed street to the peak of slag, in the bite of the winter, with a shovel and bag, with a drooping fag and turned-up collar,